where the live stream left off last time. So we've talked about the Q&A. You can find it here where it says view 5 questions or ask a question. That's where you'll view the other questions that have been submitted. It won't say 5 if there are more questions submitted. And ask a question is where you can ask your own questions. So going over kind of what the site is like. On the left-hand side here, you'll see some background information on the grant program. And then at the bottom here, you'll see files, which is kind of some important files for you. The first one is just kind of a one-pager overview of what the ecosystem building grants are about, and it puts them a little bit into context for the rest of the grant program. The second one here is the guidelines document, and that's the kind of more thorough version of the guidelines to get really deep into the details for you. And then this bottom one is the budget template, and we'll talk about that. We'll go through that after we kind of look at the site here. Then going back up to the top, you see this big apply button, and we'll talk about that in a second. You've got my contact email. Please be nice with it. Really, it's more for using in the case that you need some technical assistance with maybe the application side if you're running into issues. For any questions you have, we ask that you submit them via the FAQ page. Because this is a competitive application, we do need to make sure that everyone has access to the same answers to questions. Then you've got the important dates here, the deadline for submitting your application, the deadline for when questions are due, and then you have the grant amounts. So since it's one kind of standard amount up to $100,000, it doesn't break it out into categories or anything. You've also got here the workshop dates. They are all up to date, and if you want to find more up-to-date information, or make sure the information you have is up to date, you'll check out innovatesac.eventbrite.com. And then it mentions here that the reviewers are members of our Mayor's Tech Council. So back up to the apply button here. When you're ready to start your application, you'll click this giant button here. Right underneath, you'll see view a previous application or resume a draft. I'll click that real quick. If you've started an application, or even, I believe, if you submitted your application, you can put your email address in here, and it'll email you a link to be able to edit it. And that's helpful if you start and you want to come back later, or if you have changes that you want to make to your application, you'll use that. So back here to apply, and this takes you into the application process. So I also want to kind of show you really quickly what happens when you start an application, and if you want to go back and start another. So let's say, I type in, I start to make my application, and I believe, I hit enter, sorry. Let's say I start my application, and then I want to open up a new window and start another application at the same time. When you do that, you'll see this here, an option to resume your draft or to start a new draft. And so, you can have multiple drafts going at once. If you start an application and you save it, you'll still be able to use this view a previous application or resume a draft. But this is what you'll see if you start a new draft kind of in the same window session. So let me go back in here, and we'll go through We've broken up the application into a few different sections. So the beginning is just kind of your basic information. The next piece is the project description, where we ask some information about what you want to do. The next section is the in-depth project details. That's where we start to ask about your goals and objectives and your metrics, and milestones that you're seeing for your project. We also ask about where your project will be located, in this piece. Yes. And then the next section is finance and budget. This is where you'll tell us how much you're requesting, and you'll upload your project budget. Yes, you'll upload your project budget here, and we'll talk about the sample budget here in a second. Let's see, you'll also tell us about match funding or in-kind funding. And then the last section is where we ask about the amount of awards you have received or have been, I guess you could say, promised to receive in the last 36 months from the city. Then there's this last question here about anything else we need to know. You get up to 50 words. I'm hoping that the application was thorough enough that you were able to share everything that we need to know, but just in case there's anything else, you'll put it right here. You're able to preview your application before you submit it, and then once you submit it, you'll receive an email that has a copy of what you submitted to us. So, really quickly, we'll go over the budget template. So here we've kind of laid out for you really simply, hopefully, so that you can just kind of plug in and go. So it starts here on this left-hand column, and maybe I can zoom in a little bit. It starts here in this left-hand column with the categories. So we have some pre-filled categories, labor, and I don't believe, can you see them? You might not be able to see them. Oh, nope, it doesn't look like it. So we've got some pre-filled categories, and maybe if I type them in, you'll be able to see them. So we've got labor, okay, I guess so. All right, so back to the document. Pre-filled categories, so we have here labor, we have materials, we have rentals, we have marketing, and we have other. So I'm hoping these first, and we also should have intern. That one was in there before, not sure where it went. And I'll make sure that the document that you have on your screen door has those categories. So these 6 categories here should, including others, should encompass anything you can possibly think of. You can use other, you likely won't use other. I'm hoping that labor, materials, rentals, marketing, or intern cover everything you could possibly think of. But you'll start by filling in what the category is of your item. Then next you'll go over here and you'll add item you'll add the description of the item. So here you don't have to get super in-depth in your description. I don't need to know super specific details, and there's a good possibility sometimes these details change. So if you, for labor, for example, if you put in, program manager, that's sufficient for me. I don't, if you're thinking about getting super specific, so materials, let's say you need cameras and you want to put in, let's see, Dell, webcams, webcam 200. I don't need to know that specifically. You could just put in webcam, you could just put in cameras. We just need an idea of what those items are that the budget makes up. So again, you don't have to get super specific. We just need kind of an idea of what you'll be purchasing. So here in quantity, we'll want to know how many. So in the case of labor, it's usually in hours, so we'll kind of look at quantity and units together. So let's say you have 100 hours of program management, and let's say you're paying that person $50 an hour. It'll auto-populate what the cost is by multiplying the quantity by the cost, or it'll auto-populate what the total is by multiplying the quantity times the cost. So similarly with cameras, let's say you need 20 cameras. You just say cameras, and the cost is, maybe $25 a camera. It's $500. So you don't have to do all the math. The sheet will do it for you. You just need to kind of be, for our purposes, just kind of let us know what those units are, how many, and how much the cost is per unit. So we'll take a look at this sample budget here. You've got each of the categories kind of laid out. Payment to staff, project management, circuit board kits, tools, table and room rentals. So this is kind of a good idea of what your budget might look like that you're submitting to us. As you can tell, it's not super specific, but it's specific enough to give us a good idea of what you'll be doing. So we will go back to the presentation now. Now that we've kind of gone through the application form, and then just a quick note here, when you take a look at the guidelines, for the grant guidelines, you can see each of the questions we have on the application as well. So if you're worried about getting started with an application, just to find out what the questions are, if you look at the guidelines, all of the questions are laid out in the guidelines. So you can use that to write your application before you get it started on the website. So very quickly, some of what we've been doing in the past couple years is aligning this particular grant program with the city's renewed efforts around inclusive economic and community development. So internally, there's a lot of different things going on between, you may have heard about the Measure U committees or the investment committee, and some of the work that the city has been doing in certain neighborhood areas. Our office is not completely separate from that. We're aligned with that in that we are also working to kind of build that inclusive economic and community development mindset. So as such, this is our current statement around diversity and inclusion for the innovation team. So I'll read it out for you. The City of Sacramento is committed to ensuring fair and just treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all people while identifying and eliminating barriers that have prevented the full participation of some groups. In alignment with the city's inclusive economic development priorities, SUTL aims to expand economic opportunities that benefit underserved and underrepresented communities, thereby reducing racial, social, health, and economic disparities in these communities. So with that being said, this program falls into that. So we are looking to see that you are taking those things into consideration with your grant application and that your program will address some of these needs. There's a question in the application around priority neighborhoods, and these are some of the neighborhoods that the city has identified as priority neighborhoods. So we are looking for, if you are going to be located in a priority neighborhood, that you are keeping in mind the population that you're trying to serve and how being thoughtful about addressing those populations. So before I launch really quickly into some FAQs, I will reiterate to please read the guidelines. I tried to be as thorough as possible when making them up for you so that we could address just about anything that could possibly come up. There's always more questions that could come up, and there will be questions that come up, but we wanted to make sure you had all the information that you could desire within the guidelines. So please read them. I know not everyone will. It is a little bit daunting because it is 15 pages, but it's all the information that we hope you could need to understand the context of the program and to develop a good application. With that being said, I'll go real quickly into the FAQ. The first question that we get often is, do in-kind contributions count for the one-to-one matching funds? The answer is no. It must be a cash match. So last year it was a requirement if your application was over $100,000. This year it's not a requirement, but you could get bonus points. But it has to be a cash match. It can't be in kind. Can you put up the funds for the one-to-one cash match yourself? Absolutely. The question gets asked in the application. Please list the sources and amounts of any additional funds that will be provided to the project, and that's where you will say who will be providing the cash match. So and if you don't have a one-to-one cash match, you'll still fill in this question. We're just looking to find out what other sources of funding and support are going into the project. Can matching funds come from multiple sources? Yes, you can be a provider. You can get grants from other entities like SMUD or the state, or even federal grants. Funds can come from wherever they come from. If my organization is not based in city limits, can we apply for a grant? Yes, you can, but your project must be located in the city limits or primarily serving city residents. And so that's because this money is City of Sacramento money. It's money from our city, so we want our residents benefiting from these dollars. Can my organization submit multiple applications for different projects? Yes, you can. There are no limits to the amount of applications you can submit. There's a couple stipulations we have, or that it's kind of a request that I have Please don't submit multiple applications expecting that they all get funded. If only one of your applications gets funded, and it is contingent on another piece that you submitted being funded, then we may have a problem. So make sure that if you are submitting multiple applications, they're not dependent on one another to actually happen, or make sure that you're clear that that there is other funding in case other pieces are not funded. So during review, it may come up, oh, will this project actually happen if we only fund one piece of it? Just make sure that you're clear that you will have other funding if other pieces, if you do have if you do submit applications for pieces that link together, make sure you're clear that there is funding for the other pieces. Otherwise, it may just be safer for you to put in an application for all of the pieces, or just if you're applying, just having, like I said, completely different projects you're applying for. So just keep that in mind. When you're applying for multiple things, don't expect multiple things to get funded. There is the wild off chance that multiple pieces do get funded, and so keep in mind that what you may do if that's the case. Will you have the capacity to execute? So just some things to think about. Before I get into resources, I think I will go over really quickly some of the FAQ questions we have so far. Question 5 here is basically asking if a startup is eligible to apply for this grant. We've gotten this question a couple times. If your startup is in the business of being a startup enabler or helping build that pipeline into the industry, then yes, you can apply. Otherwise, this particular piece is not the piece for you. Question 4 here is about where programming is located. It got a little bit complicated about if they're located in the city but their funding for the project goes outside of the city. So it got, well, you can read the response. It's on the FAQ page. Obviously there's some things that you maybe can't spend money on inside of the city. So if you need to purchase something, or let's say you're running a training program and you want to purchase software, and it's not made in Sacramento, it makes sense that you would spend money outside of the city. But if you're wanting to run programming, like let's say you're doing a training camp for students, and you're wanting to be located in, let's say, Rancho Cordova, that since you may have a hard time getting Sacramento residents participating in that program, that likely will not be a good use for funding. But it was a little bit complicated. If you have a similar question, but more specific, feel free to ask it. Try to answer that in the most clear way with a general idea of what the question was. Question 3 here was about non-disclosure. Basically, the answer was, if your information you have to consider the information that you submitted to us eligible for a Public Records Act request disclosure. So we ask that you not submit super proprietary information. If there's a way in your application to do that, we ask that you do that. If you don't feel like you could be clear without submitting it, that may be difficult. You don't have to tell us your secret sauce, I guess, is kind of what I'm trying to say. If you give us a general idea of what you're looking to do as a part of this application, that is kind of what we're looking for. I don't need to know what proprietary thing you've done, but under the grant process, we do give you warnings if there is information that, or is a Public Records Act request that we're asked to submit. There's also, as a part of the contract, we ask that, similarly, that you don't submit to us any information that you feel like is proprietary unless you are explicit about it being confidential. So things that are requested through Public Records Act requests do usually go through and get looked at to see if something is confidential or proprietary, and if it's marked so, usually we'll be able to kind of keep that from being disclosed. But again, we are a public entity and we are subject to those requests, so just keep that in mind. And then there was a question about obligations after 2 to 3 years, and for the grant, it's mostly regarding financial disclosure. So if we have an audit and we ask you to provide records of spending, that could be something that we have, that we're asked to disclose in the future. We also kind of have, we have had in our contract conditions about being located in the city or keeping property purchased as a part of this grant program within the city for a certain period of time. Question 2 was about the funding amount and how many projects would be funded, and if being a nonprofit puts applicants at an advantage or disadvantage. And then question 1 here was why we're focusing on specific subtle verticals. And you can take a look at those. I don't believe there are any new ones in the queue right now. If you have more questions, feel free to ask, and we'll get that answered. You have until November 18th to ask, and we have until November 25th to answer, but we'll try and answer them as quickly as possible. So, back to the presentation. We'll go over these resources really quickly. So you can find the guidelines, application portal, and Q&A at innovate-sac.org/innovation-grants/ecosystem-building. You can contact us at this email here, team@innovatesac.org. Even though my email address is also on the application site. Upcoming workshops, we have one this Friday at 6 p.m. And that's at New City Hall in room 1119. Then we've got one 2 Thursdays from now. Yep, 2 Thursdays from now on November 23rd at 11:30 a.m. That'll be online, and the link for that will be posted soon. And then to find up-to-date information on these workshops, you'll go to innovatesac.eventbrite.com. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll look forward to seeing your applications.